بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وعلى أصحابه وعلى من والاه. يا ربنا افتح لنا أبواب العلم والفهم وأبواب العبادة وارزقنا بحسن الخاتمة وثبت أقدامنا ولا تأخذنا بذنوبنا ولا تسمع للذين يقصدون سوءا لنا أن يغلب علينا. أنت مولانا فانصرنا على القوم الظالمين. أما بعد، علماء الفقه, sometimes you hear statements from them such as wajib al-waqt. We have the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam min husn al-islam al-mar tarkuhu ma la ya'nih. And in that hadith, wherein there's a discussion on what is befitting of a Muslim, is noted that he tends to that affair which is before him. And sometimes that hadith can be translated as mind your own business, but it's not necessarily from the angle of privacy, like you do your own thing, that type of thing. It's more of like tend to what is the priority of the moment, like focus on what needs to be focused, and that is a manifestation of you doing well in your Islam. We ask Allah for that. And so between that statement of the fuqaha with regard to wajib al-waqt, to determine what is wajib al-waqt in that hadith, we get a lot of understanding that we have to come to comprehend what is the obligation of the moment. Wajib al-waqt means what is the obligation of the moment, right? Determining what it is becomes a matter of assessing what's going on in your environment and then aligning yourself with your goals and understanding how you're going to reach them within that time frame that you're in or that context that you're in. And then the sunnah gives us that push that we have to focus on that which is a priority for ourselves. And we also have another hadith which the qa'idah fiqhiyya or the legal maxim is built upon it. The hadith of intention we all know, but sometimes we don't know that upon that hadith is built a legal maxim. And this hadith is from Qawaid al-Kubra, is from the major legal maxims. So it's really a principle of guidance, and that's the al-umur bi maqasidiha, that affairs are governed, or even determined or judged by their objectives. And so with all of that was just said with regard to having to lazim an nuhaddid wajib al-waqt, we have to determine what is the obligation of the moment. And with that, the sunnah tells us that we should pay attention to what is our obligation of the moment and occupy with ourselves with it. And then the sunnah also tells us that our affairs overall should have objectives. And so when we look after assessment, and that assessment should be a comprehension of what they call fiqh al-waqi'. Fiqh al-waqi', there's nobody that disagrees over it. That is a necessary aspect to understanding how to implement the deen. Even Shaykh al-Albani, when he was questioned on it from the Salafi Da'wah, wrote a small pamphlet on it. So we have to understand what is going on. In other words, we have to assess what's taking place. So when we assess our reality and we look at how much we have lost in 20, 30 years, we look at the condition of the world, we look at the condition of the country that we're living in, we look at ourselves, our families, we look at the general environments that we live in. There's no other time than now to make a move. And that move has to be a move that's going to impact the next 25 years solidly. We're living in times of radical change. Times that will determine how it is that the next generation will manifest itself, will live, if we even have that much time on the earth. But I believe that we do. And so just because there's changes taking place in the US doesn't mean that it's the end of the world. That's a very Christian orientation towards things. Just because something has happened to the European American community, all of a sudden you start announcing that the end of the world is coming. The end of the reign as we knew it is shifting. There's other determinants, other factors that are coming into play about how the world will manifest. But the world as we know it has gone. It won't return back to what it was. Normal is no longer the case, and we've been programmed for that. I was just watching a video from the World Health Organization this morning, and they repeated 3 times, normal as we knew it is gone. We will not return back. And so there are some things that are being noted on that. And it's very true. Some countries are taking major hits. For those conspiracy theorists who say that COVID is not a reality, you know, that remains to be seen with regard to the deaths that we're seeing throughout the world. And we're hearing, it's by ear, word of mouth, that the reports are coming in to people, you know, with regard to what's happening to people's families and so on and so forth. It's not just an issue of just believing what the news says. All of that was said to say that the world is changing. The economy, capitalism is definitely going into a shift. The longer that this economy stays locked down, the more detrimental it'll be for it to revive itself. You know, it's not going to revive itself in the same way. You know, companies are restructuring, jobs are being eliminated, things are being done in new ways. Other things are becoming obsolete. So then, you know, when we look at ourselves in this type of environment, environmental issues. Environmental issues. Environmental issues are impacting as well. We have limitations and constraints when it comes to the environment. So all of that, in addition to the psychological states that we're in, what becomes the obligation of the moment? That's the question. Muslims have the opportunity to come out of this with strength, or have the opportunity to just lose out on the moment of shaping a generation. You know, when we were talking about the problems of racism for the last 5 years or so, there was a big marginalization of it. People were acting, now it's at the forefront. So we have the ability to correct our relationships with each other. You know, before, if we were to talk about if we were to talk about if we were to talk about the shifts in the economy, nobody would believe. 20 years ago, definitely nobody would believe. 2007, 2008 economic crisis was a shock to many people because of the stability of what they knew. You know what I'm saying? Was put into question. But now what we're seeing on the global scene, we have the opportunity to start introducing alternative economics. We have the opportunity to start building community. We have the opportunity to put our focus on renewing the deen. Pardon me because I'm traveling, so GPS is giving some directions. We have the opportunity to do a lot of things, but let me tell you something. We won't be able to do these things if we're going to keep on the same path that we were before. We won't be able to envision a better life for ourselves as Muslims and as a contributing force for humanity if we continue with the way that things were done before. All of that stuff was given 25 years to play itself out, and we see where it got us now. You know, we're at a point where we need a complete renewal. We need a reset button. And so that becomes the obligation of the moment.
7 millas. Sal hacia State Route 83 South Kingery Highway.
We have, we have to look at the opportunity that is before us and not just look at the challenges only. There's this opportunity in the midst of all these challenges to really create a better orientation for ourselves. So I want to end on that note that we have to think about what is the obligation of the moment. Without community, it's very difficult to survive. What is the obligation of the moment? Without family, it's very difficult to survive. Right? Without a spiritual base, very difficult to survive. Without a knowledge base, very difficult to survive. Without economic base, very difficult to survive. What becomes the obligation of the moment? I'm giving you some hints there. But there's some things that, we really have to look at. There's a lot of shifts taking place, right? But are we ready? And I always pose this: if this whole thing were to collapse, would the Muslims be in a capacity to be able to rebuild the society? If this whole thing were to collapse, would the Muslims be in a position to cooperate with others to bring about good? If this whole thing were to collapse, would the Muslims be able to work together amongst themselves, or will they collapse into groups of sectarian interests and just do what everybody else is doing in the world, just start to fight each other? If the Muslims were called upon to contribute, will the Muslims be ready for that? Like, for instance, what happened with the Prophet Yusuf alayhi salatu wasalam.
Sale a la derecha hacia State Route 83 South Kingery Highway.
When Yusuf alayhi salam was called upon, he was ready to take initiative. Are we in that position? You understand what I'm saying? If we were to have to leave from this place to go to another place like Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam, will we be ready? If we would have to retreat for a little while, then to come back the way that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam left Mecca and then he came back, will we be ready? There's a lot of questions to be asked. Like, where do we stand on things? That's really the question, that is important. Where do we stand on things? We're coming up for an election year. What is our response to that? I've seen some awesome things coming, for some people. I've seen some younger people. SubhanAllah, I seen this younger sister in Jersey. No matter how much you criticize, she's making a move to try to get into Congress. I saw a Latina sister and a Latino brother. They're not Muslim. They're trying to make moves for getting on the ballot to be president, right? I've seen other people just go and they take their... I seen one sister, she just decided to completely change her life. She just took off and went to Puerto Rico. She decided she's going to stay and she built a dawah organization. I'm seeing a lot of energy coming from women into like visionary thinking. Where are the men at? I don't know. Where are we at?
En media milla, gira a la derecha es Summit Avenue.
So that becomes the question, is like, where are we at? What do we want? Where are we going? What's the vision? What's the plan? What's the obligation of the moment? We have to have an obligation of the moment. Men don't just allow historical realities to just run over them. That's what we're listening. We hear people, all the LGBT community, all this, all that, but you don't see any sense of empowerment. People act like, people are beating us up. The same people that are saying that the left is calling us to be just victims, we're seeing that same reality with the way that we are being dealt with now. Our own brothers, that's how they're dealing with this situation. It's like we're victims. No, you have the power to bring something to the table in the world. You have the power to act in a capacity that's beyond yourself if you were able to duplicate your efforts, if you come together with others. You have some power to make some moves. It's not just people impacting us only. The question is, what are you doing to impact back? You know, and then how effective are you by yourself? Wouldn't you be more effective if you learned how to deal with others? You know, and so those become real questions, because time, you see these grays coming in, these wrinkles coming in, death is before us. That stuff is really real. COVID-19, the angel of death is before us. It's real. So then it becomes like, since death is before us, can't escape it. There's no sugarcoating it. There's no running from it. There's no forgetting about it. There's no being preoccupied with other things. You know, what are we contributing to the table? And I say we because we belong to each other, right? We belong to each other. We're supposed to be a community. You know what I'm saying? So we have to start having dialogues. Keep saying this, like, use this social media thing to envision another world. It's a platform of influence where we impact each other. Don't go by what these Jerry Springer type figures are doing. You know, unfortunately, this is the mentality that some have online. Don't say, oh, online is a fake world. No, it's part of our lives. But if we generate discussions on possibility, if we generate discussions on how to better our situation, if we generate solutions, if we generate vision, you understand what I'm saying? Then we'll have a sense of direction. You know, if you begin with the end in mind, what do we want out of life? I think as Muslims, we're confused. We don't know what we want out of life. Don't give me all that life is ibadah. We know that. Don't take a beautiful statement from the Quran and make it cliche and empty out its meaning. That's not correct. You know what I'm saying? We know the purpose. You know, some people say the purpose of life is only to get the Jannah. No, that's not true. That's shying away from the responsibility that we have. And that's why I've become so harsh on some of these Aqidah discourses, because they're not about empowering the human being. They're about getting us to debate about who Allah is. And it's not that complicated. You know, from the angle of the Quran is clear on a lot of fundamentals. And I mentioned that before. Just look at Surah Al-Ikhlas by itself, Surah Al-Fatiha. If those things are understood, Imam Ibn al-Qayyim wrote books, volumes, on just Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. Volumes on it. Just one ayat of the Quran. Imam Shafi'i said, if the only thing to be revealed were Surah Al-Asr, it will be enough, sufficient for you. That it would be a minhaj, in other words, a guidance. And so, you know, the reality really is not all of the detail and the technical stuff. We need scholarship in that, but it is really, what do we agree to? What is the vision that we want? Change your conversation. Let it flow in another direction. Begin to act like a person that belongs to an ummah. Begin to act like you have impact on history. Like you have, like your life counts. Your word counts. Throw it out there in the atmosphere. You know what I'm saying? And share it with other people. You know, and change the culture on here. Change the culture on here. If you change the culture on here, if you identify things that you want to build and want to do, it's a possibility that other people may agree with you and other people may go in the same direction with you, or other people may argue with you. You may have to block people. But the reality is that I believe that it's much more greater that other people will run with you than what you believe. If we as a community began to envision, trust me, a lot of people listen. Good and bad people listen. A lot of people listen. And they take ideas. You'll be surprised who's listening. You know, you'll be surprised who's listening. And so, what is the obligation of the moment? What should we be working on? Somebody, please type in my chat box one thing that you think is the obligation of the moment. What should be our priorities? What should we be focusing on? What can we do to impact the next 25 years? You know, how can we take a hold of the moment to be effective so we have an impact the next 25 years? What is our vision? What should be our vision? Don't be greedy with your time. Give me some sadaqah, some zakat. Answer those questions or one of those questions for me. You know, and bring other people into that circle of thinking. Right? Instead of just thinking the world's going to fall apart, think about, okay, what is my role to rebuild? Or, you know, how can I position myself to make a move to be of assistance? Don't give me the whole thing that the Dajjal is coming or the end of the world is here because you see that. You know, look, that type of thinking is not really Islamic. We know all of those things, but that's what the knowledge of Allah Ta'ala. The question is, what are we going to do at the moment to impact the future? We're still going to have to live in the moment to impact the future with all the challenges. Waiting for your answers. Assalamu alaikum.